I'm Danielle Morgan, 23 years old, and 3 days before the most important interview of my life, I opened the drawer where I always kept my passport and found nothing but an empty space. I sat there for a moment staring at the spot like it would suddenly produce the document on its own. Then I got this sinking feeling in my chest, the kind that tells you something isn't just lost, it's been taken. That evening, across the dinner table at my parents' house, my sister looked at me with this smug little smile like she already knew what I'd discovered. In that moment, everything I thought I could count on family fairness trust shifted. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for something no one thought you deserved. I was born and raised in Brighton, Indiana, in a house where hard work and loyalty meant everything. My mom, Patricia, did accounting for a local food distributor, and my dad, Frank, ran maintenance at the middle school just a mile down the road. We weren't fancy, but we were steady. I grew up thinking the world rewarded effort, that if you kept your head down and did your part, eventually things would fall into place. School came naturally to me. I loved learning about other countries, how governments worked, how policies could change lives. It all started back in 4th grade when we had to do a presentation on the United Nations. I spent days in the library buried in books most kids would have ignored. That was the first time someone my teacher, Mrs. Ellison, told me I might have a future beyond our small town. My older sister, Morgan, was never interested in any of that. She had a way with people, funny, charming, always at the center of things. Even when she got in trouble, it seemed like no one stayed mad at her for long. While I was organizing debate club schedules and mapping out Model UN resolutions, she was skipping class or changing her hair color to match the season. And still, somehow our parents looked at her like the sun rose and set in her eyes. The difference between us didn't bother me much when we were younger. But over time, little things started to pile up. When I was in middle school, she knocked over my science fair display the night before the regional judging. In high school, she borrowed my laptop the night my final essay for AP History was due and deleted it by accident. That was the pattern. Something would happen. I'd get blamed. She'd say it was a misunderstanding. My parents would nod and move on. I kept pushing anyway. I got into the University of Chicago on a full ride, majored in political science with a focus on international development, and built my future brick by brick. The Rhodes Scholarship was more than just the next step. It was the door I'd been trying to unlock my whole life. A chance to study in England, connect with global thinkers, and work toward a career in diplomacy. I'd practiced for the interview for weeks. I even bought my first real suit, navy blue, nothing flashy, but it made me feel strong. Everything was set. I had my plane ticket, my documents, my itinerary. The interview would take place in Oxford itself. All I had to do was show up ready. And then that Tuesday morning with the clock ticking down, I reached into that drawer and felt the world tilt under my feet. I checked everywhere, every folder, every coat pocket, even the freezer. By the time I called my best friend Megan, my hands were shaking. She hadn't been to my apartment in weeks. That left one possibility. I dialed home. "Did Morgan stop by my place recently?" I asked Mom, trying to keep my voice calm. "Oh, sure," she said. "She went by last week to grab one of your textbooks. I think she's thinking about taking a few classes." That was it. That was the moment. The moment I knew exactly who had taken my passport and exactly why. And what I didn't know yet was how far she'd already gone to keep me from getting on that plane. I stood there in the hallway with the phone still in my hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you put Morgan on the line?" There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the television in the background and the low murmur of my mom calling her. Then that voice I'd known my whole life came through, sweet on the surface, sharp just underneath. "What's up, little sis?" I clenched my jaw. "Morgan, I can't find my passport. It's not in the drawer, and I've turned my whole apartment upside down. Did you happen to see it when you were at my place?" There was a beat of silence. just long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Why would I notice your passport?" She said, that easy practice tone in full swing. I just picked up the book and left. She always had a way of sounding innocent, even when the evidence was sitting right in front of her. And this time, it practically was. I opened up her Instagram on my laptop. The latest post showed her sitting at a kitchen table, chin resting in her palm with a little smirk on her face. The caption read, "Sometimes you've got to delay someone else's journey to find your own. Sorry. Not sorry. Family first." There on the table next to her elbow was the unmistakable corner of a navy blue passport. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys and drove to my parents' house, hands gripping the steering wheel tight the whole way. Morgan opened the door, still in pajama pants like it was just another lazy afternoon. "Didn't expect you today," she said, standing in the doorway without moving. "I want my passport back," I told her. "I saw your post." She blinked, then leaned against the doorframe. "You're being dramatic. That wasn't about you." I didn't respond. I stepped around her and walked straight to her bedroom. She followed close behind. "You're not going to find anything. I don't have time for games, Morgan. The interview is in 3 days. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." Jealous of what she snapped. "You ditching your family to run off to England, pretending you're better than us." I stopped in the middle of her room. "This isn't about pretending. It's about working for something I've wanted since I was a kid. It's always about you," she said, arms crossed tight. "Every conversation, every holiday. Mom can't stop talking about what Professor so-and-so said about Danielle and how proud she is that Danielle might go to Oxford. Meanwhile, I'm the screw-up." I stood there listening, letting it hit, because it was more honest than anything she'd said in a long time. But that didn't make it right. "So you did take it," I said. She looked down for a moment, then back up. "Maybe I did. Maybe it's the universe trying to tell you something." I didn't answer. I pulled out my phone and called the house line again. "Dad needs to come home," I said when Mom picked up. "Now." They arrived about half an hour later. Mom looked concerned. Dad looked tired, like this was just one more thing to deal with. "What's going on?" he asked, setting his lunchbox down near the door. "She stole my passport," I said. "I need it back." Morgan put on that same face she always used when we were kids, wide-eyed, a little hurt. "I didn't take anything. She's panicking and blaming me like always." I showed them the Instagram post. "Look at the corner of the table," I told them. "That's my passport." Dad squinted at the screen. Could be a notebook. And the caption, I asked, "Delaying someone else's journey." That's exactly what she's doing. Mom sat down next to Morgan. "Honey," she said, "did you take your sister's passport?" Tears welled up in Morgan's eyes. "No, Mom, I swear. That post was about therapy. Dr. Benson says I need to focus on my own growth. I'm not sabotaging her." I stared at them, waiting. Mom looked at me with that same soft voice she always used when trying to calm things down. "You're jumping to conclusions. I think you're stressed and overwhelmed. We're proud of you, but maybe you're pushing too hard." I turned to my dad. "Please, this interview is in 3 days. If I don't have that passport, I miss it." He exhaled and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Maybe this is a sign of what I asked, that some things aren't meant to be forced. Maybe this international ambition stuff is too much. Maybe you'd be happier staying close to home." I couldn't speak for a second. I just stared at him. "I'm not looking down on anything," I said, "but this scholarship people dedicate their lives to getting a shot like this." Mom nodded slowly. "We know, sweetheart. But there's something to be said for staying connected to your roots. What if instead of England you thought about teaching here in Brighton? The community college has a great program." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "This isn't about a job," I said. "It's about a lifetime of work." "You always make it about you," Morgan snapped. "Maybe I'm struggling too. Maybe I needed you around instead of showing off." Showing off. By working hard. Dad raised his hand, that quiet signal that used to end all our childhood arguments. Enough. If this opportunity is meant for you, it'll work out. If not, that's life. That was it. The words landed like a door being shut. I left without another word. Back in my apartment, I locked the door behind me and sat on the floor for a long time. I couldn't think, couldn't cry. I just felt hollow. When I finally picked up the phone to call the Roads Committee, my hands were shaking. I explained that I'd lost my passport and begged really if there was any way to reschedule or interview remotely. The woman I spoke to was kind, but firm. "The committee's schedule is fixed," she said. "I'm very sorry, but without a valid passport, we'd have to withdraw your application." I hung up and sat staring at the wall. There had to be a way. There had to be. I tried calling my advisor, Professor Bailey. He sympathized, but there wasn't much he could do. I called the passport office, checked expedited services. Everything took a week or more. By the time the sun went down, I was running out of options. And time. That night, I texted Megan again and tried to explain what had happened. She called right away. "We are not letting this happen," she said. "We're going to figure it out. There's got to be another way." I didn't know what she could possibly do, but I let her talk. I let her plan. And that's how the next chapter began, not with help from my parents or my sister, but from the one person who refused to let me give up. I barely slept that night. I kept turning over every possibility in my head, calling again, trying someone higher up, checking for a miracle appointment at a passport agency, somewhere, anywhere. But each time I circled back to the same brick wall 3 days until my flight. No passport, no way out. Megan showed up the next morning right at 7:30, knocking with one hand and balancing a tray of coffee and a paper bag in the other. "You haven't slept," she said, stepping inside. "You look awful." "I feel worse," I told her, setting my laptop aside. "Well, drink this," she said, handing me the coffee. "Because we're not done." She pulled out her laptop and sat cross-legged on the floor. "We're starting something called Operation Passport Rescue. Don't laugh. We're getting you to Oxford." I didn't laugh. I didn't have it in me. But I watched as she opened a blank document and typed the title in bold. "We're going to think through every option, even the long shots. And no shutting anything down until we check." We started with what we already knew. The fastest government-issued replacement was 3 to 5 business days if you had a death certificate or a signed affidavit for a medical emergency, neither of which applied here. I had all my documentation, but no emergency that fit their policy. "What about contacting the committee again?" Megan asked. "Maybe if a dean called." "They already said no," I told her. "All candidates have to be interviewed in person. No exceptions." Megan frowned, scrolling through her browser. "What about traveling to Canada and trying from the embassy there?" I leaned in to look. "The logistics are impossible. That would take just as long." We kept digging. Temporary travel documents, consular services, anything. Every road led back to the same thing: time. And time was exactly what I didn't have. It was almost noon when Megan paused mid-scroll. "Wait," she said. "Here's something." She turned the screen toward me. "An expedited passport service registered with the Better Business Bureau offering 24-hour turnaround for emergencies." "This sounds like a scam," I said. "Read the reviews. And look, they have a partnership agreement with the State Department. It's legit. The service had connections with regional agencies and a courier system that cut down wait time. The catch, the 24-hour fee was nearly $2,000. I stared at the number. "I don't have that. I'm already maxed out from the plane ticket and the suit." Megan sat back. "Then we ask for help." I shook my head. "I can't." "What am I going to say, that my sister stole my passport and my parents backed her up?" "No," she said calmly. "You say your passport was stolen and you need to replace it in time for the Rhodes interview. That's all." The thought made my stomach twist. The idea of asking for money, of exposing any part of this mess, I'd rather lose the interview than explain it. Danielle, she said quietly, you have given everything to get to this point. You don't owe shame to anyone. And the people who care about you, they'll want to help. I didn't answer. I'll do the outreach, she said. You just give me the names. We started with my professors. My advisor, Professor Bailey. Dr. Vincent from Political Science, the head of the honors program. I drafted a short email, straightforward, careful. I explained I'd lost my passport days before the biggest opportunity of my life, that I'd found a way to replace it in time, but I couldn't cover the cost alone. No details. Just the facts. Megan read it once and hit send. By evening, we had a few responses. Professor Bailey sent $200 with a note. This opportunity is too important to lose over paperwork. Keep me posted. Doctor. Vincent added $150, saying the department hadn't had a Rhodes finalist in nearly a decade. More trickled in. Some were small amounts, $25, $50. A few came from students I'd tutored over the years or classmates from early seminar groups. By nightfall, we had just over $600. It still wasn't enough, but it was more than I thought anyone would give. We were packing documents and checking requirements for the passport service when my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number. Hello, Danielle, it's Aunt Karen, your mom's sister. I stood still. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. Megan reached out to me. She continued. She told me what's going on. I just want you to know I understand. She told me a story I'd never heard before, how years ago she'd been accepted into a language immersion program in Tokyo, but my grandfather had never given her the acceptance letter. He said women didn't belong overseas. My father clipped my wings, she said, and I've spent a lifetime wondering what would have happened if I'd gone anyway. This ends with you. She didn't wait for me to respond. I'm covering the rest, and I added enough for your hotel too. You get that passport. You get on that plane. You go live your life. After we hung up, I just stood there with the phone pressed to my chest. Megan reached over and tapped the laptop. Then we're moving. We called the agency first thing in the morning. The representative walked us through everything: application forms, documentation, proof of travel, payment confirmation. You'll need to be at the Chicago Regional Passport Agency by 11, he said. Bring all your materials. Our courier will meet you outside. It was a 3-hour drive. Megan grabbed the keys. You're not going alone. We were halfway to the car when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Heard you figured out a way around the passport problem. Some things just aren't meant to be fought. Mom and Dad are worried about you. It was Morgan. I showed the message to Megan. She didn't say anything. Just turned around, walked back to my apartment, and changed the locks. Then we got on the road. We were just outside Joliet when my phone rang again. It was Aunt Karen. They know, she said. Your mom called me this morning furious, said I was meddling. Morgan's been posting on social media. They're trying to stop you. I didn't know what that meant, what they could actually do. Don't let that document out of your sight, Aunt Karen said. Don't talk to anyone you don't recognize. If they show up in Chicago, get help. I thanked her and hung up. Megan and I looked at each other. I'll talk to the passport agent, she said. We'll be ready. We reached the building with 10 minutes to spare. A man in a dark jacket holding a clipboard waved us down outside. It was the courier. He checked my documents, walked us inside, and fast-tracked us to the agency counter. We had just handed everything over when I saw him. My dad. In the corner of the lobby talking to a security guard. His eyes were scanning the room. I grabbed Megan's arm. She turned, saw him, and whispered, We need to alert the agent. I texted the courier. His reply came fast. Stay where you are. Do not approach him. I'll handle it. 5 minutes later, he returned and took us through a side door out into an alley. Your father tried to claim you weren't authorized to travel internationally, he said. but your paperwork is in order." We informed him he'd need to leave or be escorted out. I didn't speak, just nodded. We booked a nearby hotel under Megan's name. We weren't taking any chances. The passport would be ready by morning. That night in the hotel room, I barely moved from the chair by the window. Megan sat across from me, both of us waiting in the quiet. Tomorrow would tell us if we'd made it in time. We barely spoke that night. Megan took the bed closest to the door and left the desk lamp on. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to traffic move down the street outside our hotel window. The hours passed slowly, each one carrying the weight of everything we had managed to hold together. The next morning, just after 8, my phone lit up with a number I recognized. "This is Marcus with Premier Passport," the voice said. "Your document's ready. Where should we deliver it?" I gave him the hotel address. "Courier's already on the way," he said. "You'll have it within the hour." I thanked him, then sat up in bed, holding the phone in my hands. Megan rolled over and looked at me. "It's coming." I nodded. She got up and turned on the light. "Let's get you packed." By 9:30, the courier knocked. He handed over the envelope without ceremony, just a quick signature and a polite smile. Inside, nestled between 2 stiff sheets of cardboard, was my new passport. I held it in my lap, thumbing the edge of the cover, trying to believe it was real. Megan checked the time. "Your flight's at 6. If we leave now, we'll make it back to Brighton by 2. We grabbed our bags, double-checked the room, and headed for the car. Neither of us said much during the drive. The tension had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, but something more focused. We were close. 1 step left. As we pulled into my apartment parking lot, Megan slowed the car. Morgan's sedan was parked across 2 spaces near the entrance. "She's here," Megan said quietly. I nodded. I figured she would be. We parked on the other side of the lot. I got out and walked straight toward the building. Morgan was sitting on the hallway floor just outside my door, arms crossed, scrolling on her phone. She looked up when she saw me. So she said, standing, "You really went through with it." "I did," I said. "Now I need to grab my suitcase." She didn't move. "Mom and Dad are upset. Dad drove to Chicago to try to talk to you and you just disappeared." "I had to disappear," I told her. "I had a courier, a passport agency, a flight to catch. I didn't have time for anything else." "You've changed," she said. "This scholarship, it's turning you into someone else." I didn't respond. I stepped around her and unlocked the door. Megan followed me in. Everything inside looked just as I'd left it. My suitcase was by the front door. My carry-on bag was under the table. Morgan stepped in behind us, arms still folded. "You don't get it," she said. "You've always had the spotlight. Every birthday, every graduation, it was always about you. And now you're going to Oxford." "What does that make me?" I turned to face her. "I don't know, Morgan, but I can't keep making myself smaller so you feel bigger." She didn't answer right away. She just stood there. "I've spent my whole life trying not to upset you," I said. "Trying to be successful but not too successful. Trying to celebrate but not too loud. And it's never been enough. You're leaving the country," she said. "You're going to go and never look back." "I'm leaving for school," I said. "I'm not erasing anybody. I just can't keep living by rules that only apply to me." I zipped my suitcase and stood it upright. Morgan watched me. "What should I tell Mom and Dad?" I looked at her. "Tell them I'll call when I'm settled. Tell them I made it to the interview." Megan lifted the carry-on and held the door. "And tell them I hope one day they'll be proud of me, not afraid of what I'm becoming." We left the apartment without another word. The drive to the airport was quiet again. I sat in the passenger seat, passport in hand, checking my flight information one last time. At the terminal drop-off, Megan pulled over. "You get through security and then text me." "Got it." I nodded. She gave me a long hug. "They tried to stop you, Danielle, but you made it." I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. I walked through the sliding doors, handed over my boarding pass, and headed towards security. The agent barely glanced at my passport before waving me forward. Inside the gate area, I found a seat by the window. Outside, the plane was already waiting. I pulled out my notebook and glanced at the notes I had written: interview questions, talking points, policy references. It all looked familiar but distant, like it had come from another life. The overhead speaker called for boarding. I picked up my bag, stepped into the line, and let them scan my ticket. As I walked down the jet bridge, I thought about everything it had taken to get there. The missing passport, the locked doors, the donations, the long drive, the silence from my parents, Morgan's face in the doorway. None of it had stopped me. The plane was cold when I boarded. I found my seat by the window, buckled in, and placed my bag beneath the seat in front of me. As we taxied toward the runway, I pressed my forehead to the window and closed my eyes. In just a few hours, I would be landing in a place I'd only ever dreamed of visiting, facing an interview that could change everything. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The plane leveled out somewhere over the Atlantic. I opened my laptop to review my notes, but the words blurred together. I'd barely slept the night before, and now the cabin lights were dimmed, the hum of engines settling into a low rhythm that made it hard to stay alert. I tried to go over a few talking points case studies on post-conflict reconstruction, recent trade policy reforms, international education access, but I couldn't hold focus. I closed the lid and leaned back. Somewhere around hour 4, I dozed off. It wasn't restful. In the dream, I was standing in the interview room, and Morgan was there at the table shaking her head. I tried to answer questions, but nothing came out. I woke with a start when the flight attendant tapped my shoulder. We were preparing to descend. Heathrow was busy even in the early morning. I followed the signs through passport control, retrieved my bag, and boarded the express train to Oxford. Outside the window, the countryside passed in soft grays and green fields. My body was tired, but my mind was already turning toward the interview. I rehearsed answers silently: policy frameworks, ethical diplomacy, global health. In Oxford, I checked into a small guest house recommended by one of last year's finalists. The woman who ran it showed me to a quiet room upstairs and insisted on bringing up tea and toast. "You Rhodes girls always arrive in a state," she said with a small smile. "Take a short nap, then a walk. That's the trick to handling the jet lag." I did exactly that. Slept 90 minutes, then forced myself outside. The air was cold and damp, but the city was beautiful. Stone walls, narrow lanes, church bells echoing somewhere beyond the rooftops. I passed a group of students carrying books and scarves wrapped tight. This was where I was meant to be. I found a cafe on a quiet side street, ordered a tea, and pulled out my notes again. I was finally able to focus. The nerves hadn't disappeared, but they'd settled into something sharper, more manageable. Around 7:00, my phone buzzed. A message from Megan. Landed safely. Nervous. I typed back, yes. Nervous, but ready. Then another message came through. This time an email from Professor Bailey. "Danielle, just remember that you've already overcome more to sit in that interview chair than most candidates will face in a lifetime. That kind of perseverance matters. We're all pulling for you." I closed the message and stared at the screen for a long time. The pressure eased a little. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed reviewing everything over and over, questions they might ask, points I wanted to make. At 3:00 a.m., I turned on the light and flipped through my notes again this time, underlining phrases I wanted to remember. I finally drifted off with the papers still spread across the blanket. The next morning, I woke to my alarm and sat up slowly. My body felt heavy, like I'd run a race in my sleep. I took a hot shower, dressed carefully in my navy suit, and tied my hair back. Downstairs, the guest house owner handed me a paper cup of tea on my way out. "You look the part," she said. "Now go prove it." The building was just a 10-minute walk. Old stone, tall windows, everything still and quiet. A few other candidates were already there, some reading over papers, others sitting quietly like I was. Someone began calling names from a clipboard. I waited, trying not to look too closely at the other applicants. One girl next to me had a Princeton pin on her lapel. Another guy further down the bench was reading fluently in what looked like Arabic. Then I heard my name. Danielle Morgan, room 4. I stood and walked across the hall. The room was large with high ceilings and heavy chairs. 5 people sat in a semicircle. 2 Oxford faculty, a former Rhodes Scholar, someone from the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, and a historian. "Miss Morgan," the chairwoman said, "please have a seat." I nodded and sat in the single chair across from them. They started with the expected questions. My academic background, my senior thesis. What drew me to diplomacy? I had prepared for those. I found my rhythm quickly. Then one of them, a man with a soft accent I couldn't place, looked down at my file. "You've accomplished quite a bit," he said. "But we also noticed something in your personal statement. You mentioned building your own support system due to challenges at home. Would you speak to how that shaped your approach?" I hesitated. For a second, I considered softening the story, saying something vague about independence. But then I remembered what Professor Bailey wrote. I took a breath. Just this week, I said my passport was taken by someone close to me. They believed my applying for this scholarship meant I was trying to leave them behind, that it was a rejection of where I came from. I looked down, then back up. It wasn't the first time I've had to choose between keeping the peace and pursuing my goals. But this time, I found help outside of that circle. Professors' classmates, even extended family. People who saw the value in what I was trying to do and stepped in to help. The panel was quiet for a moment. The chair leaned forward slightly. "And how did you manage to travel here in time given the passport issue? I worked with an emergency passport service," I said. "I drove 3 hours to the nearest agency, navigated a last-minute appointment, and flew out the same day. It wouldn't have been possible without support from my academic community." The former scholar nodded. "That kind of determination is hard to teach. They moved on after that, questions about climate policy, humanitarian aid, peace negotiations." I answered as clearly as I could. Finally, the chair asked one last question. "At Rhodes, we often talk about fighting the world's fight. In your view, what fight needs fighting most right now?" I paused. "I believe we're in a time where global cooperation is unraveling," I said. "Climate migration, digital security, these are borderless issues, and yet many countries are retreating into isolation. I think the real fight is against that fragmentation. We need to build frameworks that allow different nations to collaborate without losing their identities." I gave a few examples. They nodded. When the interview ended, they stood and thanked me. The chair shook my hand. "You'll hear from us within 2 weeks. No matter the outcome, thank you for sharing your story." I stepped outside into the cold sunlight and walked slowly down the stone path. The interview was over, and somehow it felt like more than just a scholarship meeting. It felt like something bigger had been seen. The afternoon light in Oxford had turned soft and golden by the time I found my way back to the guest house. I changed out of my suit and left my things in the room, then wandered through the city for a while past old bookstores, cobbled lanes, and quiet gardens still damp from the morning rain. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't celebrating yet. I just needed to feel the space around me again. For the first time in a week, there was nothing more to do. Later that evening, I texted Megan. "Interview's done. I think it went well." She replied almost instantly, "You did it. No matter what happens, you made it all the way." I sent a similar update to Professor Bailey and to Aunt Karen. Both replied with encouragement and pride. I didn't check my messages after that. I didn't want anything, especially not from my parents or Morgan, to interrupt the quiet I had finally found. The next day, I boarded my flight home. It was a long, slow journey back to Michigan, first through customs, then a layover in Boston, then finally landing at Detroit Metro. I kept expecting to see someone waiting when I stepped off the plane, but there were no familiar faces. Megan was waiting outside in the arrivals pickup lane. I spotted her car right away. She got out and hugged me tight. "Tell me everything." We talked all the way back to Ann Arbor. I told her about the interview room, the questions, the way the panel looked when I explained what had happened. When I described the final question, what fight needs fighting most? Megan reached over and squeezed my arm. "That was the perfect answer," she said. "At my apartment, everything was just as I'd left it. My new passport was tucked safely into the front pocket of my bag. The door locks still held firm. Over the next few days, I threw myself into coursework. Finals were approaching, and I had papers to write, presentations to finish. The wait for the scholarship decision stretched out longer than I expected. I checked my email more than I should have. Morgan sent 2 texts during that time. The first was short, "Let me know if you're back." The second, a few days later, "Hope the interview went okay." I didn't answer either one. There was also a voicemail from my dad. He didn't mention what had happened. He didn't mention the passport or the trip, just said he and Mom were wondering about Thanksgiving plans. I didn't call back. A week later, Professor Bailey invited me to lunch. We met at a quiet diner near campus. He asked about the interview, then changed the subject to my senior thesis. It wasn't until we finished eating that he looked across the table and said, "Whatever the committee decides, Danielle, you've already done something rare. You kept going when everything around you said stop. That matters." I nodded. I didn't say much. 2 Tuesdays after I'd returned, I was working in the campus library when I saw the email pop up on my screen. The subject line was short. Just Rhodes Scholarship Decision. My hands started shaking. I clicked it open and scanned the first line. "Dear Ms. Morgan, we are pleased to inform you." That's as far as I got before the screen blurred. I put my head down on the desk and just stayed there for a minute. Someone at the next table leaned over and whispered, "Are you all right?" I lifted my head and smiled, still blinking back tears. "I just got the Rhodes." They nodded, eyes wide, and smiled back. I stood up and walked outside before calling anyone. The air was cold, and my hands were trembling, but I called Megan first. "You're a Rhodes Scholar," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You actually did it." I sent a message to Professor Bailey, then one to the others who had supported me. Dr. Vincent, the department chair, even a few classmates who had contributed. Aunt Karen sent back a voice message with a single sentence, her voice full of emotion. "You broke the cycle, Danielle." That's what you did. Megan organized a small gathering that night. Nothing big, just a few friends, a couple of faculty members, and some takeout in the back room of a local restaurant. Someone brought a bottle of champagne. Professor Bailey raised a glass and said, "To Danielle, who reminds us that excellence isn't always about where you come from, but how far you're willing to go to get where you belong." I thanked them one by one. I couldn't find the right words. Not then. 2 days later, the university's media office called. They wanted to feature my story on the local morning news. I agreed. The interview focused on my research interests, my plans for Oxford, and how I'd prepared. They didn't ask about the passport or my family, and I didn't bring it up. The segment aired the following morning. I didn't watch it live, but my phone buzzed with messages all day. Some were from classmates, some from old friends I hadn't heard from in years. My dad called that evening. "We saw the news piece," he said. "That's quite an accomplishment." "Thank you," I said. "We're proud of you," he added after a pause. I didn't respond right away. I just said, "Thanks for calling." Later that night, a text came in from Morgan. Saw you on TV. Guess you showed us all. No apology, no mention of what she had done, just a line and a shrug. I didn't answer. Then my mom called. Her voice was gentle, almost cautious. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean to stand in your way. We were just worried. England is so far, and you're still so young." I didn't interrupt her. I let her finish. "When you defended Morgan after she took my passport, I said you didn't sound worried. You sounded certain I didn't belong." She was quiet for a long time. "We made mistakes," she finally said. "I need some time," I told her. "I'm not angry, but I'm not pretending either. I understand," she said. "Just don't shut us out forever. I'll call you when I'm ready," I said. In the weeks that followed, I focused on preparing for Oxford. I arranged for my belongings to be stored at Megan's parents' place, and I met with a counselor to help sort through what had happened. Some days it was easier than others. The phone calls with my family became less frequent, but more honest when they did happen. I didn't explain myself anymore. I just told them where I was, what I needed, and what I didn't. By late January, I had my visa, my housing assignment, and my flight booked. My flight to England was early, one of those overnight departures that left from Detroit just before dusk. Megan dropped me off outside the terminal. She parked illegally at the curb, threw the trunk open, and helped me lift my 2 suitcases out onto the sidewalk. "I still think you should have let me carry your bag all the way to check-in," she said. "I think I can manage it from here," I told her, smiling. We stood there a moment longer. She hugged me hard. "Text me when you land," she said into my shoulder. "And remember, you earned every second of this." "I will." Inside, everything moved quickly. Security, customs, boarding. I kept my new passport tucked safely in a zippered pocket of my coat, checking for it twice, even after I'd already used it. Once the plane took off, I leaned my head against the window and watched the city lights fall away beneath us. I thought about that night just a few months earlier, sitting on my apartment floor trying to hold myself together while my future was slipping through my fingers. Now I was in the air, headed toward something I'd fought harder for than anything else in my life. When I landed at Heathrow, a university shuttle met me outside the terminal. There were 2 other Rhodes Scholars in the van, Grace from California and Eli from New Zealand. We introduced ourselves between yawns and jet lag, then rode in quiet through the rainy, gray morning. The apartment I was assigned to was on a quiet street in North Oxford, a red brick building with ivy climbing up the side. Inside, everything smelled faintly of old wood and clean linen. I had a small bedroom on the 2nd floor and a shared kitchen with windows that looked out over a garden full of damp leaves. Grace and I ended up being roommates. She unpacked while I boiled water for tea. Neither of us said much that first afternoon. We were too tired, too stunned to believe we'd actually arrived. The first few weeks were a blur of lectures, orientation events, and early morning walks along the river. I filled notebooks with ideas, read papers late into the night, and lost track of time in conversations that stretched on long after dinner. There was pressure, yes, but not the kind I'd grown up with. Here expectations were high, but they weren't heavy. They didn't come with strings. It was a relief to be surrounded by people who weren't measuring my ambition against their own insecurities. Back home, things stayed quiet. My parents called once in January. They asked about the weather and whether I was making friends. My mom said she'd seen an article about me in the local newspaper. She said they'd clipped it and put it on the fridge. I thanked her. I didn't ask for a photo. Morgan sent a message in February. Just a line, "Hope it's everything you wanted." I didn't reply. Instead, I poured my energy into the people who had lifted me up when it mattered. I called Aunt Karen once a week, usually on Sunday nights. She asked about my research, told me about the garden she was replanting, and ended every call with, "Keep going, Danielle. You're doing it." Megan sent care packages, trail mix peanut butter crackers, a tiny Michigan flag to stick on my desk. Once she mailed a handwritten card that said, "The person you've become was always there." The rest of us just had to catch up. Professor Bailey and I stayed in touch through email. He asked thoughtful questions about my projects and sent me an article once on diplomatic conflict resolution with a note that simply read, "Thought of you." The more time passed, the clearer it all became. Support wasn't about who shared your last name. It was about who showed up, who listened, who believed in your direction even when they didn't fully understand the map. One afternoon in March, Morgan called. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "Hi," she said. "Didn't think you'd answer. I didn't think you'd call." There was a pause. "I saw something online about your research, that conference thing. It's a seminar," I said. "Just a panel discussion." "Well, that's cool." Another pause. Then she said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I was scared and I handled it badly. Really badly." I didn't say anything. She kept talking. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted to say it." I waited a moment, then said, "Thank you for saying it." She asked if I might be coming home over the summer. I told her I wasn't sure. We said goodbye soon after that. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. In the months that followed, I didn't spend much time looking back. There was too much ahead: seminars, projects, research proposals, new friendships forming in shared study rooms, and long evening walks through the city. But sometimes, especially in the quiet moments, I'd think about everything that had to happen for me to reach this place, and how sometimes the people who try hardest to block your path end up being the reason you finally see it clearly. Somewhere between spring and summer, the pace of things softened. Oxford's chill lifted, and the trees that lined the old college courtyards began to bloom. I spent long afternoons in the library researching conflict diplomacy, piecing together a thesis I hadn't even known I'd been building. One morning I woke earlier than usual, and walked alone down to the canal. The water was still. A thin mist hovered just above the surface, and birds moved quietly through the hedges. I stood there for a while, hands in my coat pockets, and just breathed. That moment, standing still in a place I had once only dreamed of, was when I realized the fight was truly behind me, not forgotten, but no longer defining me. My parents never called again. I heard through a cousin that Madison had started a job at a local office supply store. She still lived at home. She still posted online, but I didn't follow her anymore. I didn't check. Whatever weight her jealousy once held, it no longer shaped the choices I made. I chose instead to focus on the people who had become my true circle. Grace and I stayed roommates and eventually friends. My professors challenged me, but also saw me. They encouraged my ideas and helped me map out a future I could shape with both clarity and compassion. Megan visited in July. We walked through the Botanic Garden, shared tea at a little cafe tucked behind a churchyard, and stayed up late reminiscing about freshman year. She said she barely recognized the person I'd become, and I knew she meant it in the best way. That night back in my flat, she said, "I don't think you even know how far you've come." And maybe I didn't, because survival had been the goal for so long, getting through the next challenge, the next betrayal, the next closed door. But somewhere along the way, that changed. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about becoming someone who didn't need permission to dream bigger than what others could imagine for her. The day I submitted my final research proposal, I sat alone in the quad for a long time, just listening to the wind move through the ivy, thinking back to that version of me who almost didn't get on the plane, who almost let someone else's insecurity rewrite her future. She would have been proud of this day. She would have seen it for what it was, not an ending but a quiet victory. I didn't need an apology to find peace. I didn't need my family to understand me in order to keep growing. What I needed was distance clarity and a life I could build without asking for anyone's approval. If you're still listening, maybe you've lived through something like that. Maybe someone tried to shrink you or make you question what you were capable of. And maybe, like me, you had to walk away not out of anger, but out of self-respect. If that's where you are now, I hope you know this: your path is still yours, and you're allowed to keep walking it even if no one cheers you on. You don't need everyone to believe in your worth, just a few good people and the courage to believe it yourself. Thanks for being here with me. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. And if it helped in some small way, maybe share it with someone who needs it too. Take care.